Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And today I am delighted to welcome Marchell Abrahams. Hello, Marchell.
Hello.
Now, you are here because you've written this fascinating book called The Great Migration to Britain, 1527 BC
Yes.
and to 485 BC. So this
Yes.
is why I was so interested, because this is proper ancient history, which we tend to associate with the Romans, the Greeks, and here it's happening in the British Isles. So,
Yes.
so this is very ancient history. What what drew you to this exploration, if I can call it that?
Oh gosh. I remember as a schoolgirl feeling that the whole was not being told us of our history. It was your schooling. I mean, you're a lot younger than me. Maybe your schooling was more enlightened. I don't know. But for us in the 60s and 70s, it was all battles and politics and wars and governments and the bottom. And I remember thinking there must be more to it than this. And I had a feeling that there was what we were seeing was islands. As I said to Richard Vobes, it's just we were looking at islands, and there was a whole mountain range, a submerged mountain range of history that we weren't being taught about at all. And then when I was in London in the 80s and working, I temped a lot, and it was a fascinating opportunity to get to learn the history of London. So if I went, say, to Fish Street Hill, I would look down Fish Street Hill, which was the M1 of its day, and there was St Magnus the Martyr at the bottom, and I could look beyond and imagine old London Bridge there with Charles II coming over it, or Elizabeth I, or whoever it happened to be, clattering up that hill. And it really sparked my taste and imagination for history. And then I read, about 20 years ago now, a book called The Holy Kingdom by Adrian Gilbert. And that was it. I was a complete goner, and I bought every book by Wilson and Blackett and Adrian Gilbert that I could lay my hands on. And I started learning this amazing network of Welsh, English, and Scots histories that we simply weren't taught about at school. Everything began with the Romans. Well, no, it didn't. And it didn't begin with the Normans, and it didn't begin with the Saxons either. There was this hinterland of pre-Roman British history, which was not being taught us. And I set to work to find out about it. And I started drawing together all the information I could find about Brutus. And he was quite easy to dig up, really, because A, he's much more recent than Albine, whose migration was in 1527. And I could consult Nennius and the British histories. Okay, the chronologies were wrong in the British histories, but I was able, with quite a lot of work, to sort that out as well. And he also turns up in the Roman records. So I began to stitch a short potted history of Brutus together. And then we went to, oh yes, and I found I could get my missing Wilson and Blackett books once again, not for £2,000, but there was a Welshman down in Glamorgan who was bringing the books out again. So I bought the couple that I was missing, and we made friends, and we went to stay with him for it was supposed to be about 6 weeks, a month or 6 weeks, and we ended up staying there for 8 months. And we did a lot of work together, and we did several interviews. And he looked at what I'd done on Brutus, and he said, "You've got to turn this into a book. Oh, and while you're at it, can you include Albine as well?" And that's how it happened, which is why the book is dedicated to him, Ross Broadstock, good friend and much missed. So that's the
So,
sort of history behind it.
and so as we might expect, there is detective work here, because
Yes,
most of us assume that the reason we're not taught this in school is because it's missing history. And here you are doing the detective work to
yes,
bring, to just look for the little pieces. It's like the Roman mosaics. And
yes. That's a very good analogy.
you've got
Yes,
you've got some of the tiles there, but there's some are broken and some are not there, they're missing, and you're
yes,
trying to work out what this mural, ancient mural,
yes.
actually looked like.
That's a
So I
beautiful
think,
putting it. Yes.
so so I love the way that you do that. And okay, my my question about the ancient history of these islands
Yes.
is to do with who was here before all of the people that we've heard about, and what did they believe. So were there people that were here from the beginning? Were there people that came here from somewhere else? And what did they believe? Because it's very clear that somebody has been here for a very long time when we consider the stone circles, for example.
Yes.
And now we're discovering, Daggerland, up
Yes.
near Scotland, or off the
Yes.
coast of
Yes.
Scotland. Um, and and that's showing ancient circles, stone circles that are even older, much older than
Yes.
Stonehenge. So what what do we know? What have you discovered?
Well, there are, I think, there are two aspects of this. The first one is the Sumerian creation legend of Tiamat. Now, Zechariah Sitchin went into this in great detail, and of course, mainstream um, historians and Sumeriologists laugh at him, but he spoke a great deal of sense, and he recounts the Sumerian legend of Tiamat being smashed into half, and one half became the earth that we stand on, and the other half became the asteroid belt known as the Hammered Bracelet. And if you think about it, here we are, we are Earth, the other half of Tiamat, the head half, and the Hammered Bracelet is the body half. I do advise anybody to go and look up the Sumerian Tiamat legend for themselves, because I am not brilliant at remembering and recounting the details. Some people have wonderful memories and can I could go through the whole thing, but I'm afraid my mind doesn't work like that. But yes, please go and look at the Tiamat legend, because we are standing on the remaining half of Tiamat. She is our Earth. And so there's that side of it. When she was smashed in half, now I have to say this is it's a bit more than speculation, because I've been able to back it up with various you can't call it evidence, but certain theories fit, let's put it that way. And also, if you look at the history of humanity, I think you'll see what I mean. When she was smashed in half, the head half, our Earth, gradually lost connection with the asteroid belt, which, if you think of it, in itself makes a stone circle. So here is Earth, and she knew that her other half was out there somewhere. And I think the people on Earth knew that this had happened. The Sumerians certainly knew it had happened. So this is why they began to build stone circles as a kind of uh, uh, like a telephone box, so that we could communicate with Earth, and she could channel her energies back up. And then over time, we forgot what the stone circles were for, and she couldn't channel her energies up, and it all got too heavy and too cold and too hard. You know, like when something's supposed to be free flowing, like water when it turns to ice. She just went hard. Earth. I hope this is making sense. And the
Well,
energies sank down.
well, yes. And the reason I mean, there's just so much in what you said. So first and foremost, for those who watch this channel regularly, you will know that I am an astrologer. And so mythology is very much a part of astrology. And so the Babylonian, Sumerian myths are very, 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 very prominent there. So
Excellent.
what I find interesting here is that something that we treat as mythology,
Yes.
you're saying, is a people's or a culture's description of something that actually
They
happened.
happen. Yes.
And I think
All
that
mythology.
there there are, this is a discussion or a debate that's been had for a long time, you
Yes.
know, over the veracity of myths and whether or not we should be taking them as literal recorded history, or whether we should be dismissing them, or whether they are something in the middle, because we are talking about cultures which use analogy and to describe events. So is this an analogy of something that actually happened, and now you're adding to that, in that you're saying that the reason we have the stone circles is because people understood the myth and wanted to reestablish that connection that they felt had been lost. And I find that incredibly interesting.
Sense. It
Yes.
makes sense. And as a matter of fact, that came to me just as we were speaking. Um, I am a great one for allowing the whoever it is, the urge to speak through one. And so much of my research has come in the nature of light bulbs going on or upsurges of insight, if I can put it like that. And never before had I actually seen the asteroid until I actually made that circle with my finger. I'd never actually seen the asteroid belt before as the original stone circle. Poo-poo it if you will, but to me it makes sense actually.
Well,
The
particularly
stone
after,
circle should. Hmm?
sorry, sometimes there's a little lag.
Yes.
uh, Particularly, I was going to say, as we know that there's this old maxim of as above, so below.
Yes.
So that's so ancient. We know that it's particularly attributed to Hermetic principles, but you know, Hermetic principles were there before they were actually starting to be written down.
Yes, of
So
course.
so we know that there's been this urge to enact, if you like, what is felt to be happening above
Yes.
here on Earth. So I find that a very interesting idea.
And of course, we have to remember when Tiamat was whole, it wasn't as above, so below. It was as one side, so the other side. And when the other half was blasted apart into the asteroid belt, which was also called heaven or the firmament, and it is an actual place, as we know, the asteroid belt exists. And I can't say what the astronomers think these days, but I know that they are keen on the idea that there was a big exploded planet. They just haven't put two and two together and come up with Tiamat and her other half. But it does make sense. I mean, I had an astonishing experience myself at Avebury years ago. I went with my little dog, and I just put my left hand on one of those big stones. Have you ever been to Avebury? I'm
No.
sure, well, it's a fascinating place. I put my left hand on one of those big stones as you enter the enclosure. And I won't say I felt a light go on or tingling or anything like that, but a few minutes later, when I'd sort of walked around a bit more, my dog and I ran, and it must be a mile round. We ran round the entire thing, and neither of us were panting. We weren't tired. When I got to the end, I thought, and I'm no runner. I never, not even 40 years ago, I was no runner. And yet I ran round the entire enclosure, feeling as though my legs had wings. And I'm sure it was because I put my hand on that stone and received some sort of energetic force from it. Now, I don't know, I have a hard Scots head, and I do like to see evidence for my facts, but there are some scientific principles that one really cannot put modern well, you can't show modern evidence for, but I'm trying to say that scientists even now are trying to measure a cubic inch of air with a ruler and a pencil. It's not going to work. They couldn't measure what was coming through my hand into my body so that I could run round Avebury without being blown. But it was an astonishing experience, and I've never forgotten it. I've had one or two other things like that, but that really stood out. And if you think about it, do you know about lexicograms? Have you heard of Linda Goodman?
Yes.
Well, Linda Goodman was very keen on lexicograms, and lexicograms are a kind of three-dimensional anagram. I go into this in the Great Migrations. And if you jumble up the letters of a name, again, this all sounds so airy-fairy, you can't pin it down, but that's because this kind of information operates on a different realm from the rational. And the rational just has to set itself aside and let the intuitive do what it will with the information. It knows its information is just as valuable as anything that comes through the rational. Lexicograms, yes. Can't remember why I started that now. Oh dear, poor Mr. Phobes. he did have he did have to reel me in rather, because I just went off at tangents like a badly made Catherine wheel. But yes, Linda Goodman was awfully good at lexicograms because they show you the inner essence of a word or phrase. And it's if you set you reduce your word or your phrase to a jumbled up, again, a circle of letters, and if you set aside the rational brain, the essence of the word or phrase will meet you halfway. This is what I found.
Well, that's very interesting, of course, because we also know that the alphabet, this is about sounds. So
Mm,
know that. I mean, when we're learning to read, obviously there's phonetics.
yes,
You're taught to use phonetics, but what we're not taught is that each of those sounds has a spiritual energy or meaning, which our ancient forefathers would have known. And so there is a reason why certain sounds are put together for particular words.
yes.
So when you're talking about lexicograms and looking at the sounds and to understand the essence of the word, of course, that makes complete sense in the context of what we know about the origins of the alphabet and how it links to sound and frequency, which
Yes.
our forefathers knew very well. And there's huge amounts of evidence that they knew it.
Sound, frequency, vibration.
Exactly.
That's
So
underpins everything.
I would say that the evidence there now is indisputable, that this is what they were doing. It is the source of magic as
Oh,
well.
yes. Yes,
So
I say in my book that what we call magic is just the action of sound in whatever form on molecular on matter at a molecular level.
exactly.
Just science that
So
we
what
have.
you're saying
of spirituality or the wisdom or the maturity to use yet. Pray God we never do, or some of us never do anyway.
So this is making sense as you're describing this, but we need an explanation here because we're talking about the British Isles and you're talking about the ancient Sumerians. So where's the link?
Delphi. It's in the book. Delphi is the link.
What is Delphi for those who are unfamiliar?
Delphi is one of the famous oracle centers of the ancient world. Dodona is older in Epirus, but Delph means a channel. Dolphin is the same word, and basically it's it's the solar plexus between Britain as the head and Sumeria as the foot. Now this, gosh, without going into it in the book, this sounds like complete gibberish, but it's actually, I've proved it by using the works of Plutarch, Morelia, volume 5. He describes, gosh, I hope I can get this right. I hope I can get my facts right. I do hate getting my facts wrong because it can mislead people. I don't like doing that. But oh, come on. Can I read it from the book, for heaven's sake?
Of course you can read it from the book. It's right there.
Yeah, I think perhaps I better. Just let me find it. Talk among yourselves for 2 seconds, just while right, 165. I hope I've got this wretched index right. Gosh, this index gave me a problem. Okay. How much can I read? It's
as much as you feel is necessary.
couple of paragraphs. Okay.
Yeah.
Delphi is the second oldest oracle center in Greece, Dodona in Epirus being the oldest. An oracular center is where the earth was thought to speak to humanity by priestesses, the channels, and was interpreted by priests. An oracular center was chosen by finding the center point on an important latitude between two important places. Thus, Delphi was chosen because it was exactly between the uttermost parts of the earth, the known world as it was, and it was here that Brutus came with his cousins. Plutarch relates how Zeus loosed two equidistant eagles, instructing them to fly towards each other. Where they met, he founded Delphi. Now, this sounds like classical hodgepodge of, nonsense, but actually it conceals a really important truth. In a passage of the most profound significance to Britain and modern-day Iraq, Plutarch goes on to record that a short time before the Pythian Games, or the Pythian Games, which were held when Callistratus was in office in our day, it happened that two revered men coming from opposite ends of the inhabited earth met together at Delphi. Demetrius the grammarian, journeying homeward from Britain to Tarsus, and Cleombrotus of Sparta. This demonstrates that the ends of the earth in Callistratus's time, which was late 1st century AD, were still considered to be where they had been when Delphi was founded, and one of the ends of those earth was Britain. Okay. Shall I go on?
Again, I think we've got enough there to illustrate the fact that Britain was not unknown in the ancient world, and I think
by no means unknown. And if you will permit me, I just want to read one more paragraph because it ties in the answer to your question, which is how are Sumer and Britain connected. So bear in mind that here we have Britain stated by Plutarch to be one of the opposite ends of the earth. I've put that furthermore, from Britain to Delphi is approximately 2,000 miles as the crow flies. And 2,000 miles further on from Delphi is Mesopotamia, specifically Ur. Sumer, in other words. And this was known about because there was a cave halfway up. I won't read anymore because I don't want to bore your viewers, but halfway up Parnassus above Delphi. Delphi itself was quite a recent, I think, an 8th century foundation, but halfway up Parnassus was the Korikeion Andron, which was a very sacred cave, and that was known about 6,000 years ago. And that to me says that 6,000 years ago, so we're talking 4,000 BC, Britain was known about, Sumer was known about, and Delphi was pinpointed in the middle as the solar plexus, if you like.
So, okay, we can see that the ancient world in the Middle East might have had an interest in Britain.
Yes.
Or the British Isles as part of their belief system. So does that mean then that that interest translates into people actually traveling from the Middle East to Britain and doing something here?
Oh, wow, what a question. I wish I were a proper historian and I could adduce all sorts of evidence. I do know that Sumerian pitch, by which I mean bitumen, has been found at the site of Sutton Hoo, which is not Saxon, it's British. That's, you know, the apostle spoons, the crosses, it's British. Wilson and Blackett have proved this. So there's, yes, Sumerian pitch is found there. It's this is a really difficult thing for me as a wordsmith to answer such deep questions, because I go where the words take me and I do the research when I get there, which probably sounds rather shallow. But if the words don't take me to a certain area, then I'm afraid I can't answer the questions. All I can do is provide, you know, a foundation. But there's the amber as well. I mean, there's you know, the Baltic amber is found in Sumer, for example. There is evidence of trade, at least, if not also cultural connections between the two countries. There's also something which fascinates me, called the Nebra sky disk. Now, when Albine, Taram Dungi, left Sumeria, she had her migration was overland, and this again can be proved by alphabets, by the DNA. Again, I'm no expert in DNA, but you know, I can read a report, as long as it's not too complicated. And the Nebra sky disk is not only on her migration route, it corresponds with the twin kingship that we had in Britain and also in Sparta, Sun and Moon, and it has the 32 constellations, which appear on the northern path of Enlil. That's another thing. That's something I'd love to pin down, but that's constellations. We need Hugh Evans for that. I can't manage all that sort of thing. It's much too big. But so there's the amber, the Nebra sky disk. The one thing about the two things really fascinating about that is not only was it buried on her migration route, it was also buried at the right time, circa 1600 BC, but the gold and the silver in it, or is it the gold and the copper? Certainly the gold. The isotopes show that it comes from the River Carnon in Cornwall.
Now that's very interesting.
Yes, as you see. Now, I don't know what to do with that particular piece of information. I am not qualified, as a proper ancient historian would be, to go and attach that to movements of peoples. All I can do is say, look, this is what I found. Please, somebody out there, go and do some more research. There's, goodness me, there's the fact that they've found gold artifacts. Now, again, I hope to goodness I get this right. At and on Lemnos, where the Hebrews gathered to come back to this country in 485, thereabouts, and also Poliochny. And these are all places that are really crucial to the British story. And the gold, the isotopes of the gold are all the same. Now, I haven't been able to discover where they came from, but if you get three places where which are really important to the migrating story of our people, and the isotopes in that gold are the same, that has to tell us something important, but I don't know how to interpret it.
Well, interpretation aside, what you are demonstrating is that there is an actual interaction, a physical interaction between
Yes.
this geographical location, the British Isles, and the Middle East, which we consider to be kind of the heart of the ancient world.
Yes. Yes.
So that there, again, what that's doing is showing that our history is much older than pre-Roman.
Yes.
So, okay.
I just add one thing. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just found it again. This useful book. The gold in artifacts found at in Sumer, Poliochny, which is on Lemnos, which is the, as I say, the island where the Hebrews gathered, and Troy, which is of supreme importance to the British story. And the gold artifacts found in those three places, which could hardly be more crucial to the British story if they tried, all have the same isotopes. So that's proof of connection, I think.
It certainly is. And I've kind of lost my own train of
I'm
thought.
so sorry. I had to get that
No,
out.
no, because the astonishment, oh, I've got it back. I'll hold on that because of the astonishment of what you say there. Because now we're talking about Troy,
Yes.
which is famous in mythology because of the Homer, the epic, and the Trojan War, etc.
Yes.
But now you're talking about Troy as, rather than it being a place of mythology, a place of history. And I think that is, for a lot of people, going to make them sit up and raise their eyebrows.
Well, really, Heinrich Schliemann did that for us 100 years ago, because he set off with a lot of money and a copy of the Iliad, and he set off to Anatolia, and he dug up Troy, or one of them.
Now you see this. So this is great storytelling, of course, which is why your book is so, another reason why your book is so wonderful. Great storytelling. So coming back then, we've got this evidence of this link between the Middle East, the ancient world as we think of it, and Britain. Where do the Celts, where do the Druids fit into all of this? Do they? Where are we here?
Well, you know, you mentioned Doggerland at the beginning of our talk. Well, Doggerland fits in, and I've done some work on this, very nicely indeed with Plato's physical description of the whereabouts of Atlantis. He talks about a wall of mud, and this all fits in very neatly with a catastrophe called the Storegga slide, which I think was about 8,000 years ago. And they've found that Doggerland was capable. You mentioned stone circles, but they've also found that there was a city capable of supporting some 10,000 people. And you know how shallow the North Sea is. I mean, it's, you know, one couldn't quite dive down, but it's not like the Atlantic or the bottom of the Pacific. It's much, much closer. I think the Atlantean remnant after the Storega slide, and again, this is my speculation. You need a couple like Janet and Colin Board for this, and I'm not them. But my speculation is that the Druidism, and Druid is a fascinating word. It has to do with not only oak trees for durability, but also doors, and other things which I'm going into in my next book. I think Druidism is the remnant of the Atlantean religion, which Plato goes into in some depth. And
Well, you might be saying it's speculation, but you are not the first person who I've spoken to make a connection
good.
between Druidism and Daggerland,
Yes,
and saying that the the Druids actually preceded the Celtic migrations into these islands. So I think that that's a very interesting supposition that you're making there.
we
So,
have to remember one thing, which is that the notion that these islands were ever Celtic was a Victorian Germanic invention. Because I know we said we wouldn't go into the politics behind the British history, and I don't want to do that, but I do have to mention, just so that I can illustrate my point, that there was a concerted attempt by Victorian academics, particularly Welsh ones, to denigrate our Trojan heritage. And anything that smacked of British sovereignty, I mean, God, are we not seeing this today now? Everything that smacked of British sovereignty, the British ability to self-governance, this was all crushed wherever possible. And the notion that these islands were ever Celtic came in with this movement in about 150 years ago. If you look at all the British histories, Percy Enderby, Gildas, Nennius, Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was only a translator, by the way, he wasn't an historian, the Celts never had more than a tiny little footfall in this country along the south coast, and that was only very recently, round about the same time as the Roman invasion, and a bit after it, thereabouts. These islands were always British, and so I just had to put that
no,
statement.
no,
It is
that's
actually a very important part of our thing. The word Celt is very interesting. There are all sorts of derivations for it, but mainly the Celts were considered to be, by Morgan and Lawrence Waddell, they were considered to be a junior branch of the Cymry and the Lloegrians and the Albans who make the British, and they basically stayed on the continent. So it's
okay.
perfectly proper to speak of Celts on the continent, but not in this country. That's what I've been taught.
Well, you see, the thing is that again, we're dealing with very ancient history.
Yes.
And why I was fascinated by your work is because it's a puzzle, and I'm interested in exploring the different pieces of the puzzle. And it seems to me, having studied ancient literature, that there's more truth in what people have come to dismiss as myth than
Yes.
we would care to think possible. And I think that that's what interests me,
Yes.
is that here we have, although there's a lot of missing pieces, there is still quite a lot of written word
Yes.
which speaks of the experience of another time.
Yes.
And I think we are doing our ancestors an injustice in using the word myth and legend in a very dismissive way, to dismiss those pretty stories that we might now teach our children, where in actual fact there is the whole exploration of them as an analogy, for instance, which those of us who work with astrology are doing all the time.
Yes.
And also now to think of them as an analogy, not just for human experience, but for events that have happened. And that, to me, is a fascinating study. And so I am very grateful for your book.
Well, that's lovely. I have observed, sorry, I beg your pardon if I interrupted you. Awful how I had to grab the thoughts before they disappear altogether in one ear and straight out of the other. The older history is, the more it degenerates in the modern mind into myth, legend, fairy story. Now, at some point in the book, and this is another thing that needs to be gone into in much, much greater depth, but I couldn't because there simply wasn't room or time. It has been shown that many of our fairy stories are infinitely older than we think they are. We think they're Brothers Grimm, or, you know, they were 1830s or something. It's no such thing. Jack the Giant Killer comes straight from Mesopotamian Ur, and it's in their stories as well. Lawrence Waddle has proved this. And oh gosh, work has been done on these fairy stories. And again, it's in here, but they're so much older than we give them credit for, but they are actually history.
But the Grimm brothers, we know, were going around collecting folk stories. And what are folk stories? It's an oral history.
Yes.
So this is so I think we need to understand that there is more to this. And even the nursery rhymes, we know that nursery rhymes, which we now teach, to tell our children, nursery rhymes were in many cases parodies or like caricatures of certain historical figures. So it's not difficult to see that there is a lot more here that we need to explore and entertain and use our imaginations combined with the facts that we see emerging along with what's being written, to help us to have a better understanding of our history. So once again, I thank you for your book, and I thank you for your work. And just a reminder to everyone, the book that we are discussing is The Great Migration to Britain, 1527 BC to 485 BC. And I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. Marchell, I thank you so much. Now, if people want to find you, is there a website?
Yes, indeed there is. It's William Congreve, William in the normal way, Congreve, CONGREVE.co.uk.
Wonderful. I'll be putting a link to that in the description box as well.
Thank you. This has been brilliant. I'm so glad you watched the other interview. The more we can get this out, the better.
It is.
I'm not just talking about the book. It's useful, of course, but the information belongs to everybody. And I want, it's been sat on and squashed for so long, and I want to see it out there as much as possible. So talking like this to you is a wonderful opportunity to reach more and more people. So thank you very, very much for asking me. This has been wonderful.
It's an absolute pleasure. And just a little footnote for those who are watching. The reason it is important is because if we want to make sense of the world in which we live, we have to know who we are. And,
Yes.
and I think that's, you know, of primary importance. So I would highly recommend that you do a little bit of research yourself, and also, of course, have a look at this wonderful book. Until next time, thank you all for watching. And oh, in fact, speaking of next time, we're going to be talking more about sound. We're going to be looking at vowels, their frequency, and healing. Until
Wonderful.
then, goodbye.